Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
Welcome to Corruption Watch Live, your partner in corruption fighting.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Phemelo and I will be your host on CW Live, your partner in fighting corruption. Corruption Watch is very excited to join the Brand Live team, and we believe that this is a platform where we will talk about our contribution in the important fight against corruption, and because we know that we are not the only one fighting this important fight, and we believe that, or we want that this platform to be an encouragement to everybody who's listening to be a participant in what we're doing and to be informed in terms of all the activities that we're doing. I think before we get to any other matters of the day, it's important to note that I am employed by Corruption Watch. I'm the media liaison of Corruption Watch. Although I'm not going to be an agent here, when I'm seated on this seat and when I'm on this mic, I will be part of the people that are listening. So I will ask very interesting, provocative, maybe slightly uncomfortable question to all my guests, all my colleagues. So be aware to anybody who's going to be part of the show. Welcome to the first show, and we're very excited to be part of this. Today we are going to be inviting you to our Corruption Watch offices. So you're going to be our guest at Corruption Watch in Bram. So you're going to be walking down our corridors, meeting everybody. We have quite a few voices from the office today, and we're very excited to hear everybody at Corruption Watch, and in terms of what they're doing and their contribution and their work. And we are, most importantly today, we're going to be talking about Corruption Watch and talking about what do you think corruption is? Who do you think corruption is? And maybe what you've been thinking is not entirely correct. Maybe we're going to be breaking a few myths about Corruption Watch and test your knowledge about us. And I'm going to be joined by our Deputy Director, Ronald, but I'll introduce him a bit later. But first of all, we are going to talk about the conception of Corruption Watch. Why do we exist? And the most relevant person to be speaking about this, I think it's our Executive Director, David Lewis. Unfortunately, he's not in the studio, but he sent us something. So he's with us in spirit, and he sent us a clip. So let's hear from him now.
Corruption Watch was formed in early 2012 as a result of discussions that began in the previous year that responded to growing evidence of corruption in South Africa. A major driving force behind that was Zwelinzima Vavi, the then trade union COSATU leader, who was quite outspoken on corruption, was getting increasing reports of corruption, both from his own members and the public. And he approached a number of his old union comrades to see whether we could investigate the reports he was getting. And we got together, a group of us, and we spoke about it. We soon decided that our capacity to investigate every single report that was coming in was going to be limited, but that what we could really do or attempt to do was to mobilize the public to engage in opposing corruption. And that's how our model started, and that accounts for the core of our model, which is to ask the public to report experiences of corruption to us. And that's how we've developed. All the content that we've developed provides the content for a public communication, a communication with the public, the better to inform them, educate them, and encourage them to participate in the fight against corruption.
So,
is that right?
So we're hearing from David Lewis. This organization started from the public really reporting corruption, and a couple of them, including Zwelinzima Mavavi, being inundated of these reports, and they said, "What do we do with these reports?" And this is where we are. We have Corruption Watch. So this is the organization is by the people for the people, and I would like to now introduce, like I said, I'm not alone. I have our deputy director, Mr. Ronald Minwa. He joined the organization in 2013, and he's one of those people who went up the ranks. He joined the organization as a campaigns officer. He then moved to stakeholder manager. He's now a deputy director. And Ronald, Mr. Minwa, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Phemelo. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. You know, I was listening to this interview where, like, the people's poet Mzwakhe Mbule, he's taking Google to the lawyers because they apparently written that he has HIV, and then so like he's taking Google and he's suing Google basically. And what he was saying in this interview, he was saying, but who is Google? You know, what is Google? So I think that's the same question that I want to pose that Mzwakhe Mbule posed to Google in terms of who is Corruption Watch and what is Corruption Watch. But I think before that, what is corruption? I think let's just start there, actually. I mean, because what are we fighting against?
Well, okay, let me start with the first one.
Okay.
Who is Corruption Watch? Corruption Watch is an NGO. As David said, we opened our doors in January of 2012, so we're fairly new kids in the block in terms of organization in the social justice sector. We are 6 years old. Our main mandate as Corruption Watch is to encourage the public to report corruption. And I think that is what makes us stand out from other organizations in the social justice, especially those that are fighting corruption. We don't wake up in the morning and look at a newspaper and say, wow, today they're talking about the Gupta Gate, they're talking about whatever leaks. We listen to what the public reports to us, and that information help us determine what campaigns we embark on. And I'm going to talk about it later on in the interviews.
Great.
And in terms of defining corruption, corruption is abuse of public resources. A lot of people in South Africa depend on the state for their survival. For security, they depend on the police. For health, they go to clinics, they must get a free service. For many other things, social security. And those people, in most cases, are being put in a situation where they have to pay a bribe to access these basic services. And that is why we exist as an organization where we're saying we really need people to access these basic services, but we need to see our public service being improved, being effective, being efficient to the public. But we don't only focus on the public sector. And I think that is the first myth I'm going to bust today. We also do a lot of work in the private sector, in NGOs. There's a lot of corruption happening in NGOs themselves, and then trade unions and stuff like that. So basically, we look at corruption holistically, but our main focus is to make sure that people on the ground receive justice.
And I did promise everybody that they're going to be visiting our office virtually today. And our first point, when you enter into our office, the first person you'll meet is Milda. And I think let's hear from her.
Hi, my name is Milda. I'm the receptionist at Corruption Watch. I've been working with the organization for 4 years. Looking forward to hear from you on the phone or greeting you as you walk into our offices in Braamfontein to report corruption.
I think one of the last points she said people must report corruption. And I think that's been our messaging in most of the things that we do. But I think also that makes people think that maybe we are the public protector, maybe we are the hawks, we are the SIU. Like myth number one, you know, are we an institution like an investigative institution?
Well, as we said in our introduction, Corruption Watch is an NGO. We do not prosecute, but we encourage the public to report corruption to us. How we go about it is that in-house, we've got a unit that takes care of all the whistleblowers. People are always scared when they report corruption, especially whistleblowers, because there's a lot of victimization that goes on in terms of their names being put out there, their contact details being put out there. So we've got a specific unit that takes care of that to make sure that your name as a whistleblower and your contact details are kept safe. We use a very sophisticated software to keep all the information of whistleblowers. So we encourage people to use us as a platform to report corruption, because we make sure that you are safe. But we also participate in the conversation in the country to make sure that the law on whistleblowing is protecting whistleblowers, because currently the piece of legislation that we have that talks about whistleblowing, which is called the Protected Disclosures Act, define a whistleblower as an employee. But we've got a lot of people at home who are not employed anywhere who experience corruption on a day-to-day basis. So it's within ourselves as Corruption Watch to work with the public, to go to Parliament and say, what can we do? But in-house, we also have a unit that is just in charge of investigation and making submissions to Parliament. But on how they do it is we strategically identify cases that we investigate. You know, there's this notion in the country, and I think globally, where we categorize corruption in terms of grand corruption and then petty corruption.
Yes.
And I would say Corruption Watch actually focuses a lot on what is I don't like that kind of categorization, and we don't believe in it, but that's what people are writing about. So we look at petty corruption. How does corruption affect you when you go and apply for an identity document at Home Affairs when an official is asking for a bribe? Most people experience it, but because they don't have an alternative to report these issues, they go back home, raise the money to pay that bribe, and go back to Home Affairs to apply for this grant. On the other hand, we've got big cases of grand corruption.
Yes.
And then the grand corruption is what people read about all the time in the media, people hear about in the newspapers. And these institutions that you mentioned, in most cases when you hear about them, we hear them about these institutions when they talk about issues of grand corruption. And now it affects how people perceive corruption in the country, because that is why in most cases one of the myths is that corruption is an issue of the elite. Because then we're talking about Nkandla, we're talking about the Gupta Gate, but we never talk about how it affects us on our day-to-day basis, when we apply for grants, when we take our children to school, the national feeding scheme and stuff like that. So I would say we are not these institutions.
Yes.
They are government institutions.
Yes.
So in our government, we've got Chapter 9 institutions like the Public Protector's Office, we've got Chapter 10 institutions like the Public Service Commission, but we've got institutions that have been put in place to make sure that we live in a safe country. And I think safety is fighting crime and also fighting corruption.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are listening to Corruption Watch Live, your partner in corruption fighting. Now we're going to go back to the office and talk to. So wait, this is what happens when you report corruption. You report corruption. You probably speak to Milda on the phone, and she will put you through to Nuku.
Hello, my name is Noku, working for Corruption Watch as the database manager in the Stakeholder Management and Campaigns Unit. We are the unit that receives the report through our 11 official reporting channels, which are website, walk-ins, call center, phone, SMS, fax, Facebook, WhatsApp, email, post, and Twitter. Upon receiving the reports, we capture the reports on our CRM Sage system, allocate the reports, making the determination if the report is corruption according to our definition, and then we classify the reports looking at the types of corruption. In the process, we contact our reporters for more information and clarity about their reports. Lastly, the reports that meet the criteria for investigation are sent to the Reports Review Committee that consists of people from the Legal and Investigation Unit, Communication Unit, and Stakeholder Unit for investigation.
Thank you so much, Nuku. So we're going to myth number 2 right away. I'm not giving you a break. Myth number 2, Corruption Watch is after black leaders. Corruption Watch is only fighting corruption that is black. Is that true?
Well, not true at all. Look, Phemelo, we live in a country where there's a bit of context that we always need to look into. More and more people are living in poverty in South Africa. The high, unemployment rate is very high, but there's also inequality. And I think as an organization, we need to find a way, we need to find a balance. And not only Corruption Watch, everyone working in the social justice sector, we need to find a balance to say, how do we fight corruption, but also contribute towards making sure that we address issues of inequality, issues of unemployment, issues of race, because I think that is what you're asking me. When you look at what we are talking about at Corruption Watch, in most cases, people are saying you are following public sector corruption, not private sector corruption.
Yes.
And I will relate what you're saying in terms of black leaders, because most people believe that black leaders are in government. And I think maybe that means white leaders in the private sector. So I think the reason there is so much interest in the public sector is what I said in the introduction, to say more and more people in this country are living in the context I've just drawn a picture of, where they depend on the state to access security through the police, education, health services, water, and all social welfare, and many other services from government. So because they are not getting what they're supposed to be getting, where public officials who took an oath of office demand bribes from the public to get these services, people now report that. And then when they report that, it can be to the public protector, to Corruption Watch. But at Corruption Watch, we've got more cases where it is just a public official who is involved in corruption, where the member of the public is reporting that. But where we see cases of procurement, especially where example would be where a government department is going to construct RDP houses, let's say. Money comes from government, but there's an element of the private sector where there's going to be a bidding process, they go through a tender process, and then they have to build the houses. And then in those instances, we find that there's always a collusion between the public sector and the private sector. But because the report came to us addressing the issue of a beneficiary not getting a house, we are addressing the issue at hand. But through the investigation, we find that, okay, this happened because of a collusion between the private sector, which in your question, in that means might be addressing the issue of saying you are following blacks, not white. So it's quite a tricky question. And it's a very real myth based on the context that we live in this country. And I think it's something that we really need to look into, because corruption doesn't discriminate. It affects us all. I mean, on our wall in the office, we always have, when you walk into the office, you'll see a big pledge. And there's a quote by Mahatma Gandhi which says, "A nation greatness is judged by how it treats its weakness members of society." And I think all these issues of making sure that people have got access to this services without asking them for bribe, for us as Corruption Watch, it means a lot. So we fight the public sector, we fight the private sector. So to us, corruption doesn't have color. It's not black, it's not white. Corruption is corruption.
Great. Now, when we heard what Nuku had to say, he spoke about a process that involved investigation unit, and Ronald also talked about a unit called investigations. Let's hear from them through Zanele.
Good afternoon. My name is Zanele Mwale. I'm Corruption Watch investigator. Our unit consists of 5 Corruption Watch members, which is lawyers and investigators. The journey for us to investigate reports. We receive reports via our committee that we've created as Corruption Watch. That committee consists of each member representing each unit. We take reports for investigation considering the following. We've got the criteria that we've written down to consider reports for investigation. The report that we want to investigate, it must have contact details, it must have more information regarding allegations. It must have names of people, surnames, designations, and their contact numbers if there's any. We take those reports for investigation. We start by getting more information to understand what is the allegations all about, so that we can see what type of evidence are we looking for. We do preliminary investigation, contacting reporters, getting information, complete the investigation if we have evidence. Our evidence depends on what the reporter has. If the reporter don't have more information, most of the time we are unable to continue with that investigation because we are not like SAPS, like NPA, like Hawks.
You are listening to Corruption Watch Live, your partner in corruption fighting. And that was Zanele from our investigative unit, just telling you the process of our investigations. And moving right along, we're going to myth number 3. So the statement is, Corruption Watch is against the ruling party. Corruption Watch has been the friend of the court in both cases with the DA, with the spy tapes, and EFF on the Nkandla matter. Is Corruption Watch against the ruling party?
Well, I think for us as Corruption Watch, we are a non-partisan organization. We do not associate ourselves with any political parties. And it does not matter who will be the ruling party of the country in the coming century. We have a mandate to hold those in power accountable. So it doesn't matter which party is in charge. As long as we see that funds are being mismanaged, there is a lot of abuse of power by those who occupy positions of power, we will do what we do. The reason we get involved, and let me take the example with the Office of the Public Protector, for example. There was a big confusion in the country when the Nkandla report came out to say, does the powers of the Public Protector bind or not? So we were doing it as an organization who got interest in fighting corruption in the country to say, here is a report, it's been released. How do we implement the recommendation or the findings by the Public Protector? And then because people were denying if the findings of the Public Protector were binding or not, it had to go to court. But you joining as friends of the court, it does not mean that you associate yourself with other other people who went to court. We were interested in making sure that in future, when the Public Protector make a finding, we know what it means. So that is how Corruption Watch got involved in the issue.
Okay, we are still working in the Office of Corruption Watch in Braamfontein, and the last person that I'm going to introduce you to is Patience.
Hi there, my name is Patience from Kosana. I lead Corruption Watch's public fundraising drive. I encourage you to go an extra mile in the fight against corruption and support Corruption Watch's work. We're counting on you.
So Patience is basically asking for funds. That's another thing. I'm very confused, Ronald. So Corruption Watch is a big organization funded by the white monopoly capital. So how are you guys asking people like me to fund you? Like Patience, Ronald, why are you guys asking for money?
It's quite interesting. I think there's most organizations in the social justice sector are running out of funds because money is being channeled elsewhere. So we find that organizations like Corruption Watch, important as they are, we need funds. And also to deal with the very same myth, to say who funds Corruption Watch, because most people, where we conduct a successful investigation and we find that children did not receive their food in the school, and then we take the Department of Education to court, for example, people are saying, whose agenda are you pushing here? Who's funding you? So that dilutes our message. And our public fundraising message is to say to people who are living in South Africa, participate, but not only by reporting corruption. If you've got something that you want to give to Corruption Watch, maybe through a month-to-month debit order or a once-off contribution, go to our website, look at how you can contribute so that you become part of the organization, you become part of the messaging that we send out to the public as Corruption Watch. And then I think that is how the public can start owning part of what Corruption Watch does. So we really need the public to assist us to raise funds so that it becomes a South African thing.
We are this is a great conversation, but unfortunately we're running out of time. But can I just ask you one question before we leave? Can we really win the fight against corruption? Is what we're doing practical?
Wow, Phemelo, difficult question. I'm an optimist. I believe we can, and I believe we are. When we started Corruption Watch, we had the public reporting. And if you look at our annual reports, we've seen an increase in the number of reports coming from the public year on.
Yes.
So for the past 6 years, so far we've got over 20,000 reports.
Yeah, wow.
And for me, that says the attitude towards corruption. You know, people in South Africa used to say corruption is part of our culture. We can't win.
Yeah.
When you see it happen, you look the other way. Yeah, people are changing that attitude now. When they see it happen, they report it. And I think for me, that is a first step to say we can win the fight against corruption, but we need to do it together.
Great. You were listening to Corruption Watch Live with your host, Phemelo signing off. See you next time. We'll talk next time.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za, an industry first in the world of internet radio. Not only are we an internet radio station, we are an internet radio platform for your brand. So why not expose your brand to potentially thousands of listeners and improve your customer relationships and brand equity with podcasts and live broadcasts? Be sure to check brandlive.co.za for more information. brandlive.co.za, harnessing the power of internet radio.